move on and introduce Davide Zaccagnini, who is the founder and CEO of Agora Labs, who'll be speaking about scaling the health data economy. And this morning, we'll also be covering the value of health data and consumer health data. As we heard on Monday, health is the new wealth, and the data is also valuable. And the value to different stakeholders is equally important to address. So let me hand over to Davide. We can see your slides and hopefully we can hear you as well.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And thank you, Sarah. Really an enlightened presentation, I have to say. And indeed, a good transition into maybe a more technical topic. We will be focusing here not necessarily on specific aspects or issues in longevity, but more into a framework under which longevity data and other types of data can be shared at scale. I liked your comment, Sarah, on the need for not only evidence-based sources, but robust data from multiple domains, and the need to integrate these multiple domains into a coherent view that is still proven to yield valid evidence, but at the same time able to deal more with the complexity of real-world life, the socioeconomic aspects, even the emotional aspects of the aging population. And sometimes clinical trials, the randomized clinical trials are not able to deliver that full and rich picture. And sometimes even the public health studies cannot get that multifaceted view on the population. But there is an important trend that has been happening now for a few years, which is the explosion of health data, mostly driven by mobile health devices and phones. Whether you know it or not, but you probably know it. Even if you don't have a health app, a lot of your health parameters are currently being recorded by your phones. And the research has been demonstrating more and more how some not even strictly clinical dimensions of your behavior, as also Sarah was pointing out, are actually very strong predictors of your future health and lifespan. So with this realm of new data that are becoming available, and again, this number is only going to increase. If you look at what the large companies that sell wearable devices, such as Apple, have in their roadmap, there is no sign that this trend will be in any way different, if not probably just even more intense in the coming years. Just to give you a quick overview of what Apple is planning with his earbuds, they are already using those devices to record gait and balance measures during walking and moving around of their users, which of course is a very important measure in the aging population as an indication of their autonomy, of their risk of fall, a main indicator of future complications, both within hospitals and in their community environment. So this is really not gonna recede in any way as a trend, is only gonna get more and more pervasive. This is already being noticed in the industry that is moving to actually utilize this data for producing the evidence at that level I was referring before. This is just a quick statistics on how much real world data and real world evidence is actually used today to run clinical studies. And again, it stops at 2016, although it's a fairly recent publication that demonstrates this. But now there is no doubt that real world data are becoming the most important type of source alongside clinical trials in the traditional sense. they're not yet taking the majority of generating evidence generating studies, but the amount of data is such that you can easily expect these proportions that I'm showing here to be inverted at some point soon, meaning that more evidence will be generated from real world data than from clinical trials. Now, this is all in a way good news, because the richer the pictures of our populations are, the better we can support them and help them. The more multidimensional data we can integrate from different sources, the more effective will be the support systems that we put in place. But there are many bottlenecks that need to be addressed before this vision is realized. And one of the main ones is apparently a trivial problem, but is at the same time the bottleneck that stops all the downstream steps and uses of these data from happening. And that is anonymizing the data, protecting privacy of each of these patients in a way that really respect their individual rights, and at the same time, though, deliver the value of their information to those who are trying to help them, either from a private sector with new drugs or new devices, or from the public sector with campaigns that really address in a personalized way their needs in a real-time fashion, or at least as close as possible to real time. So anonymization, or in the need to protect this data, is really, again, from a trivial, it sounds like a trivial step, but in reality is really the choke point of many crucial data flows that from the population should arrive to the appropriate users of this data, whether they're public authorities or private players. Because, for instance, it stops these players from even understanding if it's worth to actually address a given problem. Without the data, you cannot even size the seriousness and the gravity of a given pattern that you're seeing. It's hard to understand how much the data should be valued, as Richard was saying, because, again, you don't know exactly what they contain. It's hard to understand on the technical level how much is going to cost you to integrate the data, going back to what Sarah was saying about merging data from different domains. Well, if you don't see the data, it's really hard to know exactly what can be merged, what type of answers you will have after you did the merging, and how really you're risking the privacy of each of these patients. So as I said, privacy seems to be a problem that legal and administrative staff should deal with. We are researchers, we don't care about that thing, but in reality, it is really affecting all the work of research and policymakers downstream in a way that it's hard to perceive unless you're really engaged into that aspect. And as a researcher, I've been and still am very much engaged in European funded projects that deal with the creation and use of data platforms. And I can tell you from my direct experience that the legal frameworks and the ethical frameworks to actually allow these platforms to function is one of the main costs in these projects, and actually the most frequent cause of delays into the development of the infrastructures and into the execution of the research that these platforms should allow. So it is actually a substantial problem that is tackled in many different ways, but typically it involves steps of manual anonymization of the data, uploading the data to some kind of central repository, and so on and so forth. I won't go into the specifics of this. What I want to stress out is that this can take up to years to even activate a single data set that is relevant to some important research question or some important policy decision. There is an important and second side to this story, which is that in the private sector, there are actually still trying to solve this problem using anonymized data. This is what Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, calls the shadow economy of personal data. So working in the public sector, of course, there is much more transparency. Patients or subjects sign specific informed consent. Nothing happens in a way that is as opaque as it actually happens in the private sector. There are data houses that are really in the business of dealing with hospitals to get their data, to anonymize their data, and then resell this data to life science or health technology companies. This is, again, both ethically and economically opaque, although there is some nominal legal coverage for this type of transactions, but is nevertheless opaque, especially because now the literature is quite conclusive in saying that even if you anonymize the data, in the age of artificial intelligence and machine learning, you can simply combine a couple of these data points, the age, the zip code or geography, and the gender, to identify most of the patients in these databases, even if they are so-called anonymized. And this is really the reason why there is no scalability in data flows when it comes to reusing that real world evidence that is widely available, but also widely inaccessible. Because there is no true definition of what anonymity is and what data protection actually does, people and institutions are just very not inclined to share their data. And this is a huge problem for boosting innovation and deploying the right type of policies to actually help these populations. There is an actual cost that can be quantified in terms of defining how much privacy protection really impacts on the budgets of either the data brokers or the actual institutions. Now, there is good news in this bleak landscape. When the European Commission instituted the GDPR, which all of you know, they saw that strong privacy regulation was going to create a burden on data sharing. So at the same time, they started funding back in the 2017, 2018, when the GDPR came into force, research on privacy preserving technologies. They invested heavily, both specifically for healthcare data, but in general in the technology life cycle for anything that allowed key information and key insights to be obtained from data sources, and at the same time protect the identity and the attributes of specific populations, especially populations at risk, underprivileged categories, and the like. The research actually panned out. After a few years since those days, key technologies emerged that allow today that vision to be realized. The ability to use systems such as blockchain to enforce informed consent, but also at the same time make the process of modifying informed consent and obtaining informed consent much more efficient than the usual old process, which happened basically on paper. Blockchain also allows to track how much a given data set has been used, and whether that data set is coming from an institution, an individual, and also whether that data set responds to some quality measures. Is it standardized? Again, going back to Sarah's point on merging multiple data sources. Is it compliant with the type of endpoints that we're trying to understand? And so on and so forth. There are techniques that are applied directly to the data. Differential privacy is a way of injecting statistical noise in data sets so that the output is still statistically valid, but there is no way of reverse engineering that output so that I can glean information of the underlying population. Secure multi-party computation is another of these new technology that protect privacy. It's a way of distributing computations across independent nodes so that no node can really infer the computation from its own perspective and gather information from the other nodes, but only an aggregated output is produced that doesn't reveal what each node does not want to be revealed. And in our company, we are not only employing this solution, but also extending this specific infrastructure to also work on mobile phones that, again, on one side, allow us to really monitor in real time specific populations without actually knowing any sensitive information about the single mobile phone users who are connected to our network. So I think it's important, besides the technicalities, to look at what this really, at the end of the day, allows. So it's not only a matter of privacy protection cost, which these technologies can now drastically reduce and in many cases entirely eliminate. But it's also a matter of making data available, right? Again, Sarah was talking about the impact of Brexit on the general ecosystem of data and information and key decisions. Well, if you are really able, as these technologies allow you to be, to remove the privacy aspects from the picture, from decoupling the underlying sensitive information with the useful, insightful information that you can still collect from this data, well, then you can share these insights globally. You can actually activate data sources in any jurisdiction and allow people from any jurisdiction to get the insights that they need. Brexit or non-Brexit, this technology really doesn't care about juridical borders. Because we can guarantee anonymity, you can tap into European data, into US data, into even Asian data without being either illegally or ethically non-compliant. The other aspect that this technology allows is that since you are removing a lot of these bottlenecks in the process of accessing data, you can actually start thinking about incentivizing those who actually make their data available. There is actually an important policy change at the European level, which I will go into in a minute, which actually makes this not even possible, but actually legal and, I would say, desired from an institutional standpoint. So if you look at how these technologies really play in the big picture, you're looking at patients who can provide their individual permissions as to who can access their data, for what reason, for how long, and possibly at what cost. Same thing can do the hospitals on their side, providing through their data access policies, their institutional data access policies, the transparency that is needed for making sure that these data access requests that come from, say, the private industry or from public authorities are really transparently decided upon, and that transparency is provided by the blockchain, which is a public record, immutable record of every transaction that is happening in the broader ecosystem. So at any point, as a law enforcement agent or simply somebody who wants to check compliance, I can look at the blockchain and see that hospital X has shared data X, Y, and Z with that specific player because the permissions that the hospital put were fully met by the data user who demonstrated to use the data for the specific purpose and under the constraints that the hospital and the general legislation was enforcing at that stage. So you bring through this type of public ledger technologies a level of transparency and robustness that is simply unprecedented in the industry. So once the approval of that transaction is actually granted, and is granted, I want to repeat this, in an automatic fashion, so that the famous data access committees that may take months to even consider a data access request actually are not needed. You can run and make sure that that request is fully checked based on whatever permission framework the hospital wants to apply in real time. And then let's assume that now this permission has been granted. The computations can happen with secure multi-party computation in a distributed fashion that is further protected with differential privacy, and only analytical results that are relevant to the user and inviolable from a inference standpoint. So they cannot be back engineered to reveal anything about the underlying populations, are retrieved by the user. So you see that this is not only a highly scalable data ecosystem, but it's also open. The governance of this system is decided by those who participated in it with the blockchain. The value of each of these transactions is decided by either the patients who are providing data or by the hospitals who are storing and using their data. In this very transparent, open, and fully democratized ecosystem, we believe that innovation can thrive, whether it's for boosting more rich and articulated longevity studies, or developing new drugs or devices. The power of these open systems, I think, will vastly surpass any of the proprietary siloed infrastructures that are in use today. So the good news, in addition to the fact that we have the technology nowadays to realize this vision, is that at least in Europe, the thinking is rapidly evolving and is rapidly being translated into actual legislation. So starting with the GDPR, when my team started launching the first blockchain powered and federated learning platform in Europe through a project that really, I would say, to my knowledge, was the first in Europe, possibly the world, to utilize these two technologies together on health data. And you can check the website, myhealthmydata.eu. Starting from that initial moment, the European Commission voted in June the Data Governance Act, which is a massive change in the clarity of the legislation regarding data exchange, especially because it formalized the concept of data reuse, which is indeed the real world evidence, not only for drug discovery, but for any kind of other potential application. But it also formalizes the concept of data intermediaries. So companies, in a way, much like Agora Labs, that have the responsibility of guaranteeing privacy, they are held accountable for that specific responsibility, and they're also certified as able to indeed give that type of guarantee. Once that is done, they can broker transactions between research centers and or private institutions who honestly are not in the business of creating data platforms. They are in the business of using the data. So the brokerage, the intermediary function is fortunately now being defined, and they can also get paid. Besides the stigma that is out there when it comes to paying for data or paying for data services, in reality, we want to be realistic and understand that without actual incentives, there is no one who's going to build up this very complex technology, deep type of infrastructures just for, reputation or love of science. More importantly, the trend is that privacy laws are becoming not just a feature of very advanced countries, European or US blocs, but they're actually kicking in. In India, for instance, next year, they're going to vote on a very similar framework to the GDPR. In China, they already have something quite stringent. Many Southeast Asia countries have very similar provisions to Europe. Indeed, this Gartner report that was predicting that by 2023, 65% of the population will be covered under some kind of privacy law was actually underestimating the progression, because I would say that 65% has been already achieved, if not much more. And my guess is that by the end of 2023, 100% of the world data will be governed by privacy laws. The next very exciting frontier in terms of regulatory frameworks is the health data space. It's an initiative that has been already proposed, soon will be voted in Europe. What the health data space does is really set standards for the interoperability of data and for the progression into the actual production of medical data. If you look at countries like Estonia or Denmark, nobody uses papers in those hospitals since probably 5 to 10 years. If you look at other countries like Greece or Spain or Italy itself, there is much more technology advancement that needs to happen, and the health data space is going to address that specific question. So I'm going to close here with two messages. The richness and the effectiveness of research in longevity can drastically benefit as we add more data sources and more multifaceted information to our studies. The technology to do that is now present, is fully matured and ready to use. I'm proud to lead a company that provides those type of solutions. And in addition, the regulatory framework is really coming to match very closely what are the needs in the market and in the research community, with very solid and transparent vehicles that allow really the ecosystem to scale. And with that, I will thank you all, and I'll take any question you might have. Richard, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thank you very much, Davide. I was muted. Really appreciate your very clear, excellent talk. Are there any questions in the room? Let's start with questions in the room. And I can use this microphone. Walk around. No questions? Again, maybe I could pose the question about collection of consumer and also community data, because you've mainly focused on clinical data, which is equally important. But when does a consumer become, part of the healthcare system globally? It's a gray area, and I think it's really important that we consider wellness data in addition to clinical data.
Indeed. So I think you can look at this problem from a technical standpoint and from a legal standpoint or a privacy standpoint. Up until now, it was really complex to take consumer data, linking these data to clinical or wellness data, because separate data sources we're not able to recognize that one person making some purchases in one store was the same person going to the hospital to have a follow-up visit. It was just a very, I would say, legally and ethically risky step to take if you wanted to link those two records. Basically, somebody had to go into the two different databases, have a very close look at the data, which again is extremely sensitive from a privacy standpoint, and then decide that they were actually the same person, and so linking the data with proper identification. The beauty of some of the technologies that I was presenting earlier is that this can now happen in a way that does not infringe in any way the patient privacy. So blockchain, for instance, are nowadays supporting the concept of self-sovereign identity, SSI as they call it. So in a self-sovereign identity framework is really the patient managing his own identity. There is no third party that decides that these data belong to Davide and these other data also belong to Davide, so I am allowed to link these records. It's really the patient that can make that decision using a blockchain wallet that basically does the job of linking my data from my apps to my medical record to maybe my banking data and so on and so forth. So again, the technology is really there today to start bringing consumer data into the picture. My feeling is that all this is requiring still an adoption curve to run. We are in the early stages of these concepts. The technologies are there, but the adoption will take a while. And that it would really help for both the academic community and the healthcare community and the business community to really get together and decide on the initiatives that will boost that adoption and accelerate it.
Thank you, Davide. I think that's a very important point, and that we differentiate the consumer in the community from the patient as well. One quick question that's in the Q&A from Chris. Do you think the recent disruption in the crypto market has negatively impacted perception of blockchain technology applied to health data?
Well, there is no doubt that it negatively impacted the perception of definitely cryptocurrencies in any segment. I have very strong ties to the US, been living there for 20 years. It may not appear entirely how bad is that story. It's a massive scam that is really casting a very bad light on the whole crypto industry. Ironically, the reason why it was actually allowed to happen is that they were not really using true decentralization in their platform. FTX was actually a very traditionally architected company that centralized all their banking and financial processes. So it is really it's really unfortunate that came about, especially because again they were not even talking, walking the walk, as they say in the U.S. Now, at the same time, I think much like other crises in the past, this will bring more attention and more regulation, which we actually all would like to see. It will go away with more transparency and more intelligent regulations being applied, and this will be a trigger for it. So we were already in what they call a crypto winter over the last 3 to 6 months. It will definitely deepen because of this scandal, but I think distributed technologies are here to stay. The European Commission is very much investing in these infrastructures in a variety of sectors. And I also want to distinguish between distributed technologies and cryptocurrencies. They're not necessarily the same thing. Blockchain can be used in many cases, including the permissioning for accessing healthcare data without any currency being involved. And it's in the public perception, it's hard to distinguish between the two things, but those who understand the technology can see that there is no need to take the risk of cryptocurrencies if you still want to use a blockchain.
Thank you, Davide. There's a very pertinent question here from Matthias. Consumer health data, from what I've seen, would largely be gathered from smartphones and wearables. Any views on other means of obtaining vital data that could be used to advance longevity? And I think we're going to be hearing a little bit about this in later talks. But any thoughts on that, Davide?
No, I think you're right on. I think the question here is how big the space of wearables is going to be. I believe that will all be wearables. But if you track this area, it's incredible how much wearables are capturing from the industry and old world of medical devices. With a wearable now, you can do a full ultrasound, FDA quality ultrasound, carrying around one probe that you just plug in your phone, the ultrasound probe into your phone, and you can do an FDA level ultrasound. You can do a spirometry with a wearable. It's a gadget that fits in your pocket with the mouthpiece. You blow in it, and the Bluetooth sends your peak flow and all the other pulmonary measures to your phone. As I was saying, the Apple earbuds are monitoring gait and balance. They will soon be used to record body temperature. So you take your fever directly from your headphones. So I think it is, I don't see any other major trend in terms of completely different class of devices generating new data. But it's really impressive to see what the general category of wearable data is already doing and will be able to do even more in the next few years.
Great, thank you, Davide. Talking about earbuds, I recently spoke with a company where they are developing EEG through earbud sensors. So that's really exciting. So with that, thank you so much again for joining us, Davide.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to move on to our next speaker, and it's my pleasure